everybody. Can everybody hear me? I hope so. I'm Michael. I'm one of the moderators today. We're going to talk today about conspiracy theories. And I'm a librarian. I work at the American University of Paris. And maybe before diving into the further introduction, maybe Jason want to say hello.
Hi everyone, I'm Jason Schratz. I teach English at Go Give It Community College. It's a very small rural college in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Yeah. There you go. I think Jason and I, we came across, maybe before we start, I want to say first of all, it's getting like the 3rd year of the Media Club today. I think I remember back in the time when we started in 2018, I want to say a big thank you to Samantha, who's like in the background and doing many things there. So I want to say thank you to Samantha to keep the ball rolling. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the 3rd year there. So thank you, Samantha.
Oh, nice. I didn't even think about that. It is our 3rd year. Wow, that's crazy.
It's 3rd year starting now. About conspiracy theories, it's like a topic that I think has been around in my mind maybe a long time already. But then I said to myself, I want to learn a bit more about it. I want to I want to get a better understanding of it. So I suggested to bring it into the group and have a discussion. I don't see myself as an expert on conspiracy theories, but I think, and I don't teach it in the classroom like when I teach about information literacy. But at the same time, when I read the newspapers, the news on the internet, I have the feeling that this is something coming back all the time, almost daily right now, especially in the US context, but also like in the European or like in the pandemic context. So why not talk about it? So that was a bit my motivation to talk about it. Jason, do you want to add something right here? That's
yeah, you know, I had the same kind of curiosity as Michael. And when we came, we're trying to come up with ideas for a discussion. This seemed to be a really great one, just because there's so many things going on in the world right now that lend itself to conspiracy theory, between, you know, the US elections, the global pandemic, the race protests that are going on across the world. There's just so many things that seem chaotic. And I think that one thing that conspiracy theories do for people is they try to bring order to chaos. They try to, you know, offer a blueprint to understand, you know, a world when in a lot of ways it's far more complex and in some ways absolutely chaotic. And so the fascination is certainly there, from whether you're the person, you know, 12 hours on YouTube, you know, watching these videos, or you're the person who's watching the people watching these videos and trying to understand the whole. So it's really a fascinating topic. I think, if it's all right, Michael, I think one of the ways that we wanted to start was just to ask people to write down, maybe in the chat, some of the conspiracy theories that you're familiar with. They can be recent, or they can be, you know, 50, 60, 100,000 years old. But what are some of the conspiracy theories that you are familiar with?
Excellent. Yeah, I'm just posting the question into the chat box. I have another question, Jason.
Yeah.
Okay. Conspiracy theories, the COVID, the Sandy Hook. Kennedy was killed by the CIA. 9/11, UFOs, moon landing, of course. Okay. And, Pizzagate after the reading. I think there's many theories out there. There's nutritions. I don't know this one, Ralph. But
Ralph, what is that?
A little late.
Which one? The thing that it was supposed to be Rosicrucians. I typed it wrong.
I don't know what that is either.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that one either.
They're part of, you know, there's this whole sweeping Illuminatus conspiracy theory that goes back, you know, and so it's sort of part of the trail of that.
Okay, so I have another question for you. So you know like many of those questions, but the question is then, do you have like a favorite one that you really like and that you're really into it? It might be maybe the same answer. For example.
Renee, what do you mean by the Google autocomplete conspiracy theory?
There's a conspiracy theorist named Mark Dice. Mark Dice, during the 2016 election, had a very popular YouTube video that basically demonstrated without a doubt that Google was suppressing the autocomplete on the word Hillary health. So that basically on every other Bing and DuckDuckGo and every other search engine, Hillary health problems came up right away when you typed in Hillary H.
Yeah.
Not on Google, because Mark Dice said Google was suppressing the news about Hillary Clinton's health.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, and here's maybe a trick question. Do you believe your favorite conspiracy theory? So that's like another one. Yeah. I had to put in that question actually because I came across the Freemasons and France, and I always asked myself what it's all about, that stuff. And I thought it was just, yeah, it was so. And but maybe like a last question before we then jump into the bigger debate, or like I want to believe. Okay.
I think it's interesting how you know, some of them are certainly very serious issues, political, and some of them, like you know, Elvis is still alive, are just, I mean, in a way, kind of playful. Maybe there's serious implications in there. I can't pull them out right now, but there's definitely a difference between some of them in that way.
Yeah. Fred, I want to come back to your question, of course. I was very surprised when I was coming to France about the Freemason. I learned about that. I went even like to a museum about Freemasons in Paris. And but I always ask myself what it's all about. But yeah, so it's a longer discussion. So. And the last question is.
I was just being silly.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, but I took a first degree, so I was not. And then I was wondering, do you know also like a movie, a documentary, or like a Netflix series that talks actually about conspiracy theories? So which one? It might be like a movie or like a series.
What was Don DeLillo's novel about the JFK assassination?
Libra.
Libra. That came to mind right away.
Yeah, I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah.
So in a way, of course, like these questions are not innocent in a way, but it also shows like that there's a huge variety of conspiracy theories out there, different types. They differ all like in nature, I believe. Somehow we are confronted with them every day, but also it's part of our popular culture. When you think about it, like all in the movies or like on Netflix, Hollywood movies. So I think, But maybe
Actually,
coming
you
right
know
now.
what? That's a really great point, Michael. But the reason why conspiracy theories are frequently part of movies is kind of obvious, because you need a good villain. And conspiracy theories have the malevolent villain at the heart of every conspiracy, has a malevolent villain, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like, yes, conspiracy theories are kind of the stuff of human drama, right? There's a victim and there's a malevolent villain, and like what's not to like?
There's also a mystery to be solved. There's plot, there's story, there's,
There's a secret, there's something hidden. So there's all like, and all suspense. So no, I totally see that. You see, so it's so we're all surrounded. You see, so that's something. So then we, Jason and I, we talked about like which articles or like what to pick. Actually, we decided to. We picked the New York Times article. I think we picked it especially because we thought about like the storyline right here was very interesting to see about how this Pizzagate conspiracy theory started, like in 2016, 17, I believe, or maybe even before. Who actually was also involved? Like there was also something interesting. So you have like these different actors actually right here. That was fascinating to read, I believe. Also, like the audience, there was something interesting to see how how the audience actually clicked again on the TikTok videos on Facebook. So that was one idea, and we wanted to have like a concrete piece of conspiracy theory. And then I think the second the podcast, I think we decided, if I'm correct, Jason, it was mostly because we said there's a link between conspiracy theory and media literacy. And it was like a short podcast that's talking about this link between both of them. And,
are you talking about the TED Talk?
The TED Talk, yeah. So that was actually like our interest then to jumpstart into a conversation. And maybe you want to open up the floor, right, Jason? Except if you want to.
Yeah, maybe just start with, just the question of what do you think makes these conspiracy theories, especially, some of the less playful conspiracy theories, what makes them so seductive? I mean, what is the draw to conspiracy theories?
Narrative simplicity. Oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
So narrative simplicity, because there's a very well-edged story that people can follow and find, their beliefs centered in the story. So I totally agree with the TED Talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say also that what I said earlier, the mystery of it. Like for me, I'm not sure I believe in any conspiracy theories, but the two that I'm most fascinated by are the Kennedy assassination and 9/11, because why did the buildings fall straight down? Like that is actually a question that I want to explore, right? Or how does the magic bullet work in the Kennedy assassination? And it's that one thing that makes it plausible that you can investigate. So I think that's intoxicating or compelling.
Yeah, I want to tell a story, building on what Gina just said. I want to tell a story. You guys are too young to remember this, but back in the 1970s and 1980s, there was a national radio talk show host. His name was Art Bell. And Art Bell, at night, you could listen to Art Bell, and he would tell stories of conspiracy theories, and then there'd be like a call-in opportunity, like he would take calls from people. And when I was about 12 or 13, it was like the most forbidden thing that I could possibly do as a good Catholic school girl, right? Listen to late night radio about conspiracy theories. And one night when I was like 13, I called in to the radio show, and I fearfully stammered out some kind of reaction. And I've reflected a lot on that, because I feel like I recognized, like the point about simplicity that you were saying earlier, it was like it was easy enough for a 12-year-old to have an opinion about. Yeah. And I felt so powerful. in having opinion. It was like actually the first form of political opinion I actually ever had. Okay, thank goodness I quickly outgrew it, but when I was 12, it was kind of meaningful.
I mean, there is this kind of allure to them because it's this this invitation to not accept the narrative, the dominant narrative. And so it lets the viewer, the listener, or whatever, to become involved, to be able to make decisions on their own. And so there's some power to that. And I was just thinking with some of the two conspiracy theories that Gina mentioned, there's also a difference in a conspiracy theory that's based around I'm thinking like Pizzagate or the Sandy Hook hoax, like a conspiracy theory that's based around an unwillingness to believe the facts of the story, or an unwillingness to accept the news that is. But then there's also theories around like things like 9/11 and what was the other one you mentioned, Gina? 9/11 and Kennedy assassination, where there's actually information that's privileged, that we don't have the full story. Maybe it's because of security reasons, but there's information that's being withheld, and so we don't. So we have. There's no other option other than to kind of piece together the details of the story, because of maybe security. So I mean, sometimes it's just I'm going to believe this to support my political views or my sense of order in the universe. But other times it's, well, I don't have all the given information and I'm required to participate. And some people take this in a lot of different directions.
I was going to mention kind of tangentially from the one Renee mentioned, and another, although some of you probably recall this or maybe have read about it, was the Satanic Panic that kind of starts in the late 70s and really becomes amplified in the 80s, and was essentially, I think, for lack of a better explanation, kind of a juxtaposition of like Christianity and the discomfort that was being constructed by having kids in daycare and what could possibly be going wrong with that. And then it becomes this really elaborate story about people sacrificing Christian babies in their basements and indoctrinating children into Satanism and things like that. So, and there's, now it's become kind of an object of construction for other media. There's horror films about it, there's books about it, but it was a kind of a really fascinating paranoid thing, because there were some cases, some legal cases that were connected to, and I don't want to go too elaborate about this, but there was a UCLA researcher, if I'm remembering all this correctly, and you should never trust me, right? A UCLA researcher who was interviewing children who had supposedly been, and was doing like basically deep regression recall, and that they were all repressing these incidences of satanic ritual abuse. And the pattern was following this interviewer of children. And then cases were brought against daycares, and there was one kind of near where I grew up that had like 350 counts of ritualistic child abuse in a daycare center on the southwest side of Chicago, and then it kind of spread nationally. So,
I just saw like an old news clip of that particular one recently. I cannot remember why. Because I grew up in that area too. So, but I just, like, it was like, reporter on the scene, like in the field, like in the little play area of the daycare center. And
that, it's making me think, so the point of conspiracy theories being simple, but they really quickly get super complicated and convoluted, like QAnon, like anything can fit into the QAnon universe because it's constantly stretched to fit whatever happens in the news. So there's like this weird interplay between a simple, maybe like origin story or something, and then the like maintenance of the narrative. And some of these, like 9/11, like some of these conspiracy theories, people are obsessed with the technical scientific details and like go real deep on that. So I don't know if the simplicity is like it's like a way in to the universe. I don't know. The hook, yeah, Davina.
I wonder if it's simplicity or if it's a sense of order, which I think are two things which run parallel to each other for a while. But I think, as you mentioned, Michelle, like that order can continue to get convoluted, especially when the simple order doesn't fit all the details. It has to get more and more, variously structured, I guess. When we were reading about this, I kept thinking of two quotes. One is, one I think is, I'm trying to think of who said it. I think it was on Dax Shepard, the actor, on this podcast, Armchair Expert. We had made this kind of flippant comment. Him and his guests were talking about conspiracy theories, and he had quoted somebody else in saying, the allure of conspiracy theory is it's an unwillingness to believe that just one person or one event could change the course of history. And I think he was talking maybe specifically about the JFK assassination, that we have such a hard time believing that one person could alter the course of history. And so it's easier to come up with this more elaborate plan. But the other quote I think of, and I come back to this all the time, is kind of somewhere in the middle of Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, where he says there's, paranoia is the fear that everything's connected. And it's not, which is more comfortable, I can't remember the exact phrasing, than anti-paranoia, which is the fear that nothing is connected. And I think a lot of times conspiracy theory is an attempt to draw lines, is to make those connections, because the thought of living in a world where nothing is connected is terrifying, is for a lot of people. Those are two things that I just kept coming back to in this discussion.
Jason, I love that you said that. And the one thing that stood out to me that's somewhat related to what you're saying is the idea of the person, the one person. And this relates, I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago on postal service, and my interviewee was made the point that Americans in particular, our history is told through heroes, through people, and that we don't necessarily learn about systems, and really systems are what drove, and then the same point was made in that TED Talk in a slightly different way. And so the idea of we're so focused on people, and yet there's this, the point you made about maybe conspiracy theorists don't want to believe it's one person and are looking for some sort of answer, and because we don't have the systems knowledge, they're going to conspiracy theories. I don't know. I'm fascinated by that point.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
To add to those, and to add to those things, oh, the cat! Please keep the cat. Sorry. I also delved into the additional resource that the podcast, the series of podcasts that you sent by NYT, and they talk about algorithms. So it's fun to see how they pump you up to find those connections between separate things, and then the algorithm sort of keeps feeding those connections to you. It feels like a moment of epiphany for you. Oh, I knew that this was related to the conspiracy, and that was too. And then you feel like you have drawn the connection, when that actually is not the case.
What I appreciate about that point, Davina, is you're acknowledging that there is pleasure in that, right? That this is a fun thing. Conspiracy theories are fun.
Yeah, there's that dopamine hit when you realize that there's a connection and other people maybe support that connection, or there's one more thing that explains something for you. It's a little hit, and you want to find the next one.
Yeah, but sometimes I have the feeling as well that actually people they want to show that they know better, or they are you cannot play them, so they know better than the others. And I wonder to what extent there's like this mental disposition necessary for that I know better than the others, linked to these conspiracy theories.
So Michael, that's like an identity thing. You think it's tied into some like iconoclast identity, that you're not a sheeple? You're not a sheeple?
Yeah, in a way. So, and it's like the way we know things, maybe, you see. So I don't know. So I cannot be tricked. You see, many times I don't know, because
I think. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. But in the podcast at the beginning, she's also saying, Elise Wang, she's saying that education is not protecting smart people for falling for conspiracy theories. So I said to myself, maybe that's this kind of mental identity thing that plays into the whole psychology of conspiracy theories as well. But maybe Ralph, you might talk to that.
Oh, you kind of made me forget what I was thinking and started thinking about the idea that there is the identity characteristics that are part of this, like how you identify with being, I'm not sure because after the TEDx talk, I watched the next two it went to automatically because I was kind of curious where it would go. And they were actually fairly consistent, which was kind of interesting. But the idea that everybody kind of sees themselves as a victim and uses conspiracy theories as a way to not think that they are a worthless, failed piece of shit. They give them a reason to think that the deck was stacked against them from the start. So it's not, their fault. It's kind of funny too, because I was thinking about this. We just, with a bunch of friends, we were having a conversation about, there's a great series about Reconstruction. It's like a 4-part thing that Henry Louis Gates did. And it's interesting because as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about Reconstruction and the conspiracy theories that are kind of built into that, like attitudes about race and how you can, how you see this sort of like attempt after the Civil War to try to balance things and make them more just, and how they're completely undermined by what's still the conspiracy theory about Black people that exists in the heads of most of the people in the South. And that ends up becoming the lost cause, which is, probably one of the great American conspiracy theories, right? The idea that the Civil War was about all these other things and not about slavery. So I think there's a really interesting connection between historical explanation and conspiracy theory thinking too.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was brought up in the chat, and Ralph, you were touching on this at the beginning when you started talking about the sense of community, and one of the questions we had was, what makes people vulnerable? And I think we're already discussing this, but what makes people more vulnerable, more susceptible to conspiracy theory? Because as Michael pointed out and was pointed out in that TED Talk, a lot of times it doesn't have to do just with education. We have this image of the person who's, vulnerable to conspiracy theories. She has like the person with a tinfoil hat and all that. But yet again, when we look at the topic, whether it's vaccines or political conspiracy theories, anybody is really vulnerable to these. And so we were trying to we wanted to ask you guys, what is it? I mean, and I think that in some ways, as we already discussed, it is a sense of wanting to belong to a community. I think it's an identity thing, wanting to be the person who knows better, maybe, or who has the information before you do. But what, as well as these things, what are some other things that make people vulnerable to conspiracy theories?
So this turn that we've just taken reminds me a lot of the work of Robert Cialdini, who wrote a book called Influence. And he, the reason why it struck a chord with me was because I think his start out was he studied cults, and my understanding was, like, back when he was teaching classes about that, like there was a real sort of arrangement to get into one of those classes. But, there are certain principles of influence that he sort of cites in, what was the name of the book? Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. But one of the things that he says about cults is that, people like to think that it is that tinfoil hat person, but actually that the majority of us are highly vulnerable to this, whether we want to admit it or not, because those influential factors, like, we are all sort of preyed upon with relative ease. Things like scarcity, right? Like this idea, like I when you guys were sort of talking about, I mean, there is a sort of, like, it appeals to our inner teenager, right? Like we've got the inside track on this. We're like indier than thou or whatever. It appeals to those sort of things. There's also a kind of social proof, right? Where you're getting these things reflected back to you by like a whole number of people. There's also kind of like consistency, because they never really go away, right? So you keep seeing they can't be around for this long if there's no truth in it, right? So I mean, and on some level, like the cult thing struck a chord to me too, is because so many of these theories, on some level, there's a very short leap of faith involved because of the plausibility that Gina was mentioning earlier. So, I don't know, that was what I had going through my head there.
But there's like a term that you brought up right now, just like faith, and it somehow reminded me also of the question of trust sometimes. See, I have the feeling that when I listen to like another podcast, sometimes people do not trust like the institutions anymore. Let's say the politicians, health experts, educators that are trustable educators. So I have the feeling that there's somehow that kind of distrust. They don't. So in a way I was wondering, and then actually there's that kind of disposition to look somewhere else. I remember, for example, right here in France, there was a catastrophe. There was a gas, there was an usine, a gas who exploded. And suddenly the government was saying there's no danger, and suddenly there was like some kind of, it was smelling like a bit strangely. So people did not trust like that kind of official discourse by the government. And then suddenly there's like all this kind of rumors going on. So that's also like something that your comment just made me think about. So that's something I want to throw in right here. Well,
I was just thinking that the, I don't know if the rest of you went through this, because, you know, the interesting thing about conspiracy thinking is how vulnerable we are to it anyway. But when the Trump administration decided to start having states send their COVID information to HHS instead of the CDC, and so that was happening, which was one cause for concern and starts building in a conspiracy theory. Then that a lot of the CDC information was either being watered down and rewritten by people in the White House, which, you know, may or may not be a conspiracy theory, and that the so that the information that's actually coming out, you start feeling sort of like you don't really know how to maintain a grasp on understanding what's happening in a situation. And so conspiracy theories, while on the one hand they give you something solid to hang on to, they can also fundamentally kind of destabilize your kind of notion of, you know, reality, which can be really, you know, it can be very disempowering politically. It can be very disorienting and alienating. So.
You could see how that would quickly become a slippery slope, leading you into even more, you know, down a rabbit hole.
You know, that I want to comment on that, and if I can I share my screen with you guys? Yeah. So every year in my propaganda class, I make my students, you know, basically find an example of a conspiracy theory that interests you, summarize it briefly. Does your example fit in with the definitions of propaganda that we've explored? And I want to share one really interesting phenomenon that happened, because I think it relates to the point you just made. So you can see most of them are, you know, Beatles, McCartney is dead, Holocaust revisionism, Tupac Shakur, the earth is flat. But this one really ruffled me. Where is she here? Russia involved in the elections. And the response, right? So my students had a meaningful conversation about whether or not it was true that Russia hacked the election. It was profoundly upsetting because their vote was therefore meaningless. And now why should they bother with politics at all? And it was like, wow, they're like proving the propaganda, they're proving the link between conspiracy theories and propaganda and enacting it in my class. I felt like I didn't do that assignment after that last time. That was like 2017. I didn't do the assignment in 2018 or 2019, in part because I couldn't feel confident that the learning outcome would align with where I wanted it to go. You know, I'm all for like students' freedom and everything, but I felt like that it took it to it was risky. It was too risky for me. So I've become more fearful about teaching conspiracy theories now. And since I've been trying to teach about them for the last 4 years, I'm more fearful now than I was 4 years ago. I'm not sure if I'll teach about conspiracies this year because of my experiences in previous years.
So you bring up something, Renee, that crosses my mind a lot that I'm not sure of, but you seem to be confirming, is that they've entered the mainstream in a way that they never had previous. And not only that, but we're challenged by the one of the conspiracy theories that we as educators have brainwashed the masses. So we're not even able to cause any cognitive dissonance in that thought pattern because they're not going to believe us because that's one of the conspiracy theories. So we're in this kind of cage of reality that we don't know how to get out of.
I think that's a really good point. Just, you know, I've had similar experiences in class where, you know, I might bring up a conspiracy theory as part of an example, and I can tell by the silence or just the kind of looking around the classroom that, you know, where maybe 15 years ago to bring this up, you know, there's a sense of, oh yeah, you know, I mean, there are people out there who believe that, not us, not in this institution, but then you bring it up, you know, in more modern day, and there's always a chance that there might be some people in that group I believe in. And well, I guess like what's led to that? Is it just the amplification measures of social media? Is there something else contributing to that?
You guys, I kind of want to selfishly like hijack the conversation a little bit, because the video that you guys chose like so closely, like it was kind of like a Dana Boyd flashback a little bit, like when we had that conversation in the first year. Like, is media literacy a solution here? Like, there's a lot of arguments that, one, like if you look at media literacy efforts on YouTube, for example, the comments are full of conspiracy theorists that say that we're all just trying to brainwash society for progressive values, right? And two, there's a lot of argument within our own community about whether or not media literacy can be impactful, is the entire solution, is an incomplete solution. And I really like hearing that Renee was nervous to continue teaching conspiracy, confirmed and made me feel a lot better about my own experiences. But it scares the shit out of me because Renee can't teach it. Who the hell can? So what do we do?
Yeah, I have I feel like nothing can work in isolation. You know, it's like, I think media literacy is an important piece of the entirety, right? I actually struggle with this when I teach journalism. It's like, you can't make people believe you. You can just do your best work. You can be transparent. You can get you can get a bunch of sources, but you can't make people, you can't fix that. And so when she said that on the TED Talk, and as we're talking about it here, it's like media literacy is, I think, critically important. I think we all agree, but it can't do all the heavy lifting. I mean, I think there's so much else that we have to do in society.
Renee, can I ask you a question? With regards to your class and the way that that assignment turned out and how they kind of scared you to not want to do that type of an assignment anymore. What if you had a group that pulled towards the other side and prove that media literacy can debunk conspiracy theory? Would you still feel that fear? And is it even possible that you had an isolated group that was influenced by their peers rather than reality?
Yeah, Jackie, that's thank you for asking that great question. I do feel like one of the problems with the assignment the way I did it was that every student picked their own conspiracy theory. And so it became, with 30 kids in the class, it became kind of impossible to manage the variety of conversations. I think if I think if I were to do it again, I might put a team of kids on a conspiracy theory so that there was like a knowledge community that could, you know, look at the evidence, you know, weigh the information. I feel like I didn't do that. And I think it was bad design on my part. So yes, I do think that there's a way to do it. I didn't do it the right way, but I can imagine there's a better way. And I think small groups working on a single conspiracy theory would be a better way to move forward. And just if I do it again.
How about injecting also, you know, because this thing of one group believing and trying to prove it true and another group disbelieving and trying to disprove it, and having that type of a debate. Because sometimes when students are focused on trying to see the untruth and finding support for the untruth, the focus is different. I've read a scripture, and you know, I read the Bible a lot, and there was one book that profoundly changed my way of reading, because I realized that I started looking for a particular thing when I was reading the book of Acts, and all of a sudden that notion, that idea came forth more because I was looking for that. And so because when I would read and I would look for that, it was easier for me to find that. So therefore, if I'm looking to disprove this conspiracy theory, I'm going to be able to find support for that. And so even if two people or two groups work on the same thing, they can have a more robust conversation and others are listening, and all of a sudden you don't have everybody jumping on the bandwagon to say, oh yeah, this is really true, and therefore, oh, what's the use of doing that? Because it's kind of disconcerting to hear that they did that. So, okay, I've talked enough.
One thing that I would think, I just realized it's quarter to, well, it's going to be different for everybody, but time is, it's getting to the quarter of the hour. And one thing that we haven't discussed yet that I think that it was an issue that Michael and I kept coming back to, and also I'm looking at the picture somebody brought up very early on, was about thinking about the social media platforms as your gatekeepers for information. And so something somebody brought up was, you know, you might have, well, this was in the TED Talk, like you have, Facebook can now block somebody. And if somebody's blocked on, you know, Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram, then their you know, publicity, their popularity starts to die down. But sometimes it also feels a little bit like a smokescreen, because there's one thing, like it gives you this impression that, like, well, Facebook has our best interest, has the interest of information literacy in mind, because they're willing to block this. But then there's so much else on there, and so it's this false sense of trust in some ways. It's a sense that I don't need to do the work myself because the social media companies are going to do it, you know, are going to vet information anyways, you know, and so I just wondered what everybody thought. This is something that Michael and I were both thinking, is what do you think about social media companies as kind of the gatekeepers of misinformation? And, you know, maybe this can lead us to, well, if the responsibility doesn't fall into their hands, what can we do about this? What are some of the solutions?
I have to jump in.
Sorry. Please, go ahead.
I wanted to, thank you, sorry about that. I feel this is such a too, because when I think about social media being gatekeepers, at first I used to think it's important for them to block foolishness. It is. But then when you start blocking things that aren't so foolish and truthful, because the gatekeeper has lost its ability to allow media to come forth and allow people to select what is true from what is not true, or research, then all of a sudden the gatekeeper has become the god, and there's a problem there. There's a huge problem. So is it even possible to have social media be a gatekeeper and do it in the right manner? I don't have an answer, but I think it's a great question.
This is making me think of a conversation I had with a friend. We're both Madonna fans, and Madonna was like temporarily suspended from Instagram because she like re-shared a video from that doctor who said she had something about a vaccine and COVID, and my friend said, can't people be wrong? Like, why can't people just be wrong sometimes? And I was like, yeah, you're right, people can be wrong, but that is connected to this like larger structure that's like promoting this conspiracy theory, and that's the problem. It's not just like individuals being wrong about individual pieces of information. It's like, what is that piece of information connected to? And social media companies are the only people who have the back end perspective on how those networks are functioning, and they don't open up, so like no one really knows what it looks like inside or in the back end. So but I don't know, I'm curious if there is more at social media companies' disposal to like determine what these like larger networks that are promoting certain conspiracies are.
So two things actually. One is I'm fascinated by the idea that Zeynep Tufekci, spoke about a couple of years ago, which is how social media companies and platforms actually get into social engineering. So they kind of engineer what you're going to do, just like the TED Talk spoke about the algorithms and how you keep looking at videos one after the other, and how the speaker, I'm sorry, I forget the name of the TED Talk, said that she went from ABC News, a reportage that they'd done, to a video which was linked to one of the largest white supremacist groups in the USA. And the other thing, I guess, to what Jacques Bruteau and Michelle said, so there are a lot of social media platforms that, well, at least give the impression of taking some of the responsibility on them. So Facebook has created the Facebook Oversight Board, and our department has these research roundtables online, and I've just shared the link of a YouTube video. So that is actually this person who's closely associated with asking Facebook the tough questions. And she did try to throw some light on content moderation systems and what the Facebook Oversight Board will do and things like those. But I honestly believe it's not enough, because it's not going to help them earn more money.
Yeah, yes. And then also what Renee said in the chat is something I wanted to lift up here in vocally is the idea that our social media company, what are they? Are they media? They've been fighting being a media company, right? And we actually have rules that have worked, I mean, not great, but well for broadcasters, for cable, which we can apply, right? But we have to have the will and the right people in office and in appointed positions to do that. And until we kind of take that on, this will be a problem because they're not going to do it themselves.
Did you guys read the news about Google and Australia, the fight that they had? So Australia said that Google will have to pay for news, and immediately Google hit back saying that there'll be a lot of issues if they're forced to pay for news.
What a ridiculous, frustrating.
So, I mean, part of that problem though is complicated by the fact that Google runs the browser, which you search the internet through. They have the search engine, which is the dominant search engine. And so even the act of like opening your computer is now subject to Google's interpretation of ethics, of law, of whatever, right? I mean, and I think that's actually one of the things that sort of concept underlying that is actually probably one of the more dangerous aspects, because like I put in the chat too, we have a situation where we've allowed private companies to occupy public spaces to the point where we think that they are public spaces in and of themselves when they're not, and they do not necessarily serve public interests. But we're all we've been sort of indoctrinated into kind of market think about so much of life, right? That it's hard to see the water when you're a fish.
I think that's kind of part of the, when you see these videos of people who are screaming at, teenage Walmart employees about how their rights are being violated because there's no law that says they have to wear a mask in Walmart, which is this real, I think, like what you're suggesting, this like categorical confusion between public and private that is, kind of amusing, but at the same time, I have to say, I feel guilty kind of consuming some of those because I feel like I'm contributing to it in a way.
Yeah, and another, but a fundamental misunderstanding of how laws and rights work. My rights end where yours begin. And
she makes a point in the TED Talk, it's kind of related, about how, people have the right to free speech, but don't necessarily have the right to amplification of that speech through social media. And I think that's another one that I think people really get confused about.
Well,
That's a really debatable one too. You have the right to freedom of speech, but you're not allowed to hear, at least not on certain platforms, that freedom of speech. And when is it okay to listen to certain types of speech from others that are not okay? Who should the real gatekeeper be? Because obviously there are certain conspiracy theories that are truly very harmful, and it is propaganda, and it is wrong, and it can cause problems in society, and it can provoke fear. But yet still, if you cause something to shut and people aren't allowed to think for themselves and search for themselves, they become dependent on others who can then take advantage of them. This is really a circular problem in a way.
Jackie, you just did describe it in a way that helps us understand how complicated and beautifully circular it is, because I was going to go circle back to my childhood with Art Bell, right? And conspiracy theories predate all forms of technology except for spoken language. Like that's when conspiracy theories were born, right? We used language, right, to address the chaos of the world and try to give it order. So I feel like we don't want to oversimplify by thinking that the solution is in regulating the technology, really, because this is a human phenomenon about our need for a bad guy, our need for making order out of chaos. I feel like this was a really great conversation because it did make me think about how baked in these ideas are to the limitations of being human, really.
And the limitations of understanding too, because here's the thing. Okay, so I hope we all agree that media literacy is extremely important, and reading and understanding is, I would want to say, and maybe I shouldn't say, a basic fundamental need in our life when it comes to developing. Yet if we have gatekeepers that, because there are lazy minds that don't want to think and work and figure out and choose, they'd rather have someone feed them, it can continue to cause problems. And so how do we help people not to get to the place where they're in a place where they think they know everything, but they realize the importance of searching things out? And I could go on. I think this is such an important conversation.
It's funny because when Jackie was describing, I thought of filter bubbles and echo chambers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think the question of Jackie is very important, actually, how to tackle those ones. We've seen that we all struggle somehow with them. I think we keep it maybe with her question. We're coming to an end, actually. It's already like 1 minute past the time, right, Samantha?
Yep.
And I want to say, I think it's, yeah, thank you very much. Actually, it helped me a lot, like to listen to everybody to get a better understanding, even though I did not speak up too much. I can share like a couple of thanks also, Fred, for the, and everybody for the different references to different books. I can put in some books as well that I came across in some articles. There's also, because of lesson plans and activities in classroom, if we dare to teach about conspiracy theories, I can share actually like a link on conspiracy theories as well and lesson plans. So, and so thank you to everybody. Jason, you want to say something to the end, or even Samantha?
Yeah, I mean, this was a great discussion. I just had a question too, and I think you were getting at this, Michael, but I'm just like looking through our chat, and there are so many links and resources. Are you saying that you're gonna make those available to us? Or is there a way that we can, like, I don't know, Zoom, can you download the chat somehow?
Yeah, so after each meeting, when I send the follow-up with the video, I'll include all the links and resources. Sometimes there's a lot and sometimes there's none, but anytime there are, we pull them out of the chat and send them along. And also, I'm trying to get better with Twitter, guys. Help me and engage with me. But I'll put them in Twitter too. And that's actually a really good segue to wrapping things up. So this has been a great conversation. Thank you, Jason and Michael. And let's just keep talking about it on Twitter. Like we've already started. Davina and Renee are already all over it. So join us. Let's talk on Twitter. And I'm going to share my screen just very briefly because I want to talk about next time. So next time is October 5th, and we're going to talk about the social dilemma, and Salome is going to be back to host us. On November 2nd, we have a special title, and maybe Michelle will talk about that next time, related to the conference, actually. So that's really exciting. And we still need a host for December. So anyway, thanks to everybody. Let me stop sharing my screen. I'm so bad with this. Thanks again. I'll send out the video and all the resources. Please join us next time in October, and enjoy the rest of your weekend, if it's still weekend for you. Bye, guys.
Yeah, enjoy. Thank you. Have a nice one. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend. I hope,
Thank
Renee,
you.
you're still there. Where's Renee? Renee's gone.
Renee's not gone.
Okay.
Renee.
She's just muted.
You're on mute, Renee.
There we go.
That was really a cool session, you guys. Congratulations. Jason, you guys blew my mind.